Hands where I can see them! Now! The voice cracked, high and unnatural, shattering the calm of the summer afternoon. I froze, the garden hose slipping from my grasp and falling to the grass with a soft thud. It wasn't me he was yelling at. My heart hammered against my ribs as I saw it, a man I'd never seen before standing in the middle of my yard. And the gun in his hand, that ugly black piece of steel, was pointed directly at my daughter, my Chloe. My world simply stopped. He was squeezed into a cheap tactical vest with a laughable, crookedly stitched patch that read HOA Enforcement Division. On any other day, I would have laughed him out of my yard. But not today. Not with his finger on the trigger, not with his hand trembling like a leaf in a storm. A steady hand is a professional. A trembling hand is a terrified man trying to play a role, and that's the most dangerous thing in the world. My mind was a white noise of panic, a silent, helpless scream. Every instinct I had as a father, to run, to shield, to fight, was locked in place by that trembling gun. Any move could be our last. But Chloe, she wasn't trembling. She wasn't frozen. She stood perfectly still, poised on the balls of her feet, her shoulders back. Her eyes, the same ones I'd seen light up over birthday cakes, were now narrowed with an intensity that chilled me to the bone. They weren't looking at the gun. They were looking at the man holding it, analyzing, measuring. There was no fear in those eyes. It was focus, a cold, absolute, diamond-hard focus. A few feet away, another man watched from the shadows of the old oak tree, a faint, chilling smirk on his face. He was the director of this nightmare. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from my daughter, from the impossible calm radiating from her. In that moment, I realized a terrifying truth. The man with the gun wasn't the most dangerous person in my backyard. The most dangerous person was the one who looked utterly, completely unafraid. And as a father, I didn't know if that should make me feel better or a whole lot worse. And as a father, I didn't know if that should make me feel better or a whole lot worse. There's no manual for this. No chapter in any parenting book tells you how to react when you realize your daughter, the same girl you taught to ride a bicycle, is calmly assessing a man with a gun like he's a problem in mathematics she's about to solve. A part of me, a deep, primal part, felt a surge of awe. The rest of me was just screaming. My focus shifted from Chloe's terrifying calm to the men who had brought this nightmare to my doorstep. The one with the gun, the big, twitchy one, was clearly just the muscle. His eyes darted nervously between Chloe and the other man, the one who was in charge. This one, standing back by the gate with a relaxed posture that felt entirely out of place, was the true source of the danger. He was lean, dressed in expensive-looking loafers that clashed with the thuggish aura of the scene, and he wore a polite, chilling smile. It was the smile of a wolf watching lambs, convinced of its own superiority. He finally spoke, his voice as smooth and placid as the surface of a deep, cold lake. "Arthur," he said, using my first name as if we were old friends at a barbecue, "it seems we have a small issue here. A violation of Westridge HOA Bylaw 7, Section C, the one concerning private combat training that could cause a disturbance." His tone was so reasonable, so utterly devoid of the reality of the gun, that it made the situation feel even more insane. I found my voice, though it felt rusty and distant. "A disturbance? There's no disturbance here. Now get off my property before I call the police." The smile on his face didn't falter. "That won't be necessary, Arthur. We prefer to handle these things internally. Keeps the community peaceful." He took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving mine. "I'm Marcus. This is Leo. We're your new HOA Enforcement Patrol, just making our introductory rounds." Leo, the gunman, grunted. "She was making too much noise, yelling." "I was not." Chloe's voice cut through the air, sharp and clear as ice. It held no pleading, no defensiveness. It was a simple statement of fact. There was no yelling. She took a half step forward, a subtle shift of weight that seemed both casual and deliberate. Her eyes were locked on Marcus, dismissing the man with the gun as if he were nothing more than a piece of furniture. "You've stated a bylaw. Now, I'd like to see your identification, and a copy of the official complaint filed against this address." It was a brilliant move. She wasn't arguing. She was questioning their authority on a procedural level. She was pulling them out of their script of brute force and into a world of paperwork and rules where they clearly didn't belong. I saw a flicker of annoyance in Marcus's eyes. Leo shifted his weight, his knuckles white on the grip of his pistol. "Hey, don't get smart with us," he snarled. "It's a reasonable request, Leo," Marcus said, his voice a soft reprimand, though his eyes remained hard. He turned his full attention to Chloe. "You're a sharp one, aren't you? Most people just get scared. They comply." "I'm not most people," Chloe said. And the simple truth of that statement hung in the air between them. My mind was racing, trying to piece it together. They weren't cops. The uniforms were fake. The patrol was fake. This was a shakedown, some kind of twisted power play by a couple of local thugs who got their hands on some costumes. They were here to intimidate, maybe rob us. The thought sent a fresh wave of cold fear through me, but it was a fear I could almost understand. A robbery had a logic to it, but I was wrong. It was so much worse than that. Marcus let the silence stretch out, enjoying our confusion. He took another step, close enough now that I could see the fine stitching on his polo shirt. It was a stark contrast to the cheap, crooked patch on Leo's vest. This was planned, but planned for what? "You know, Arthur," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a more personal, more sinister tone. "You're right. This isn't really about the HOA. He paused, letting the admission land. "This is about the past. It's funny how it never really stays buried, isn't it? It just waits." My blood ran cold. The past? What was he talking about? I ran through a mental list of anyone I might have angered enough to warrant this. A business deal gone wrong? A disgruntled employee from my old engineering firm? Nothing made sense. Marcus saw the confusion on my face, and his smile widened into a grin. It was a predatory, triumphant expression. He was savoring this moment. "You really don't remember, do you?" he asked, a note of mock pity in his voice. "All those years you just went on with your life, mowing your lawn, raising your daughter. You probably slept like a baby every night." He took a deep breath. "Let me help you. Think back. A long time ago. Think about a man named Frank Thorne." The name hit me like a physical blow. Frank Thorne. It wasn't a name I had thought of in... God, it had to be 25 years. More. Suddenly, I wasn't in my sunny California backyard anymore. I was back in a grey, greasy factory in Michigan, the air thick with the smell of coolant and ozone. I was a young man then, a junior project engineer, full of ideals about doing things the right way. Frank Thorne was the shift supervisor, a big, blustering man with a reputation for cutting corners to meet deadlines. We were working on a major contract, components for the braking systems on commercial trucks. I found a flaw. A tiny, almost undetectable hairline fracture in the alloy they were using. It was a shortcut, a cheaper material substituted to increase profit margins. Under stress, under heat, it would fail. Not always, but sometimes, and sometimes was all it took. I brought it to Thorne. I showed him my data, the stress tests. He laughed in my face. He told me to bury it. He told me that's how the real world worked. He threatened my job. For a week I was in hell. I had a young family, a mortgage. Chloe was just a toddler. But I couldn't live with it. I couldn't sleep, thinking about a family on a highway, a truck driver slamming on his brakes and... nothing. So I went over his head. I went to the board. I blew the whistle. An investigation was launched. It was ugly. They found the flawed materials, the falsified supply orders signed by Thorne. It all came out. The company lost the contract, but it saved its reputation. Frank Thorne lost everything, his job, his pension. He was charged with felony endangerment. I heard he served a few years in prison. After that, he just vanished. A ghost from my past, a ghost I had long since forgotten. I stared at Marcus, and for the first time I truly saw him. The shape of the eyes, the line of the jaw. He was Frank Thorne's son. The world didn't just shrink anymore. It wasn't just my backyard. It was a grave I had dug a quarter of a century ago, and the ghost that had clawed its way out was now standing in front of me. My silent, screaming panic was gone. It was replaced by something colder, heavier, a dread so profound it felt like a physical weight in my chest. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was a reckoning. Marcus saw the recognition dawn in my eyes. He nodded slowly, the polite smile gone, replaced by a look of pure, concentrated hatred that had clearly been simmering for decades. "Now you remember," he whispered, the sound barely audible but carrying all the weight of a death sentence. "Now we can begin." He gestured with his head toward the house. "Inside, both of you. The community patrol is done for the day." The words, spoken so softly by Marcus, held the finality of a judge's sentence. The walk from my sun-drenched backyard into the cool darkness of my own home was the longest walk of my life. Every step felt heavy, like I was wading through hardening cement. The house I had built, the home where I had raised Chloe, where every corner held a memory, no longer felt like mine. The familiar floral scent of the entryway, the sight of Chloe's baby pictures on the console table, the comfortable armchair I read in every evening. It was all now just scenery in a horror film, a stage for a tragedy that had been 25 years in the making. Leo shoved me forward, his hand rough on my back. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind us, and the sound echoed in the sudden silence. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock, the sound of a cage being sealed. We were cut off from the world. "Have a seat, Arthur," Marcus said, gesturing with the pistol he'd now taken from Leo. "Right there, on the sofa." I moved without thinking, my legs obeying commands my brain couldn't process. The moment I sat down on the familiar cushions, Leo was on me. He pushed me back, hard, and pressed the cold, round muzzle of his own gun firmly against my temple. The metallic smell filled my nostrils. His other hand gripped my shoulder like a vice. I was a prisoner. No, worse than a prisoner. I was leverage. I was the chain they had just fastened around my daughter's neck. Every ounce of fight drained out of me, replaced by a hollow, sickening despair. If it were just me, maybe I could try something. Anything. But with my life as the bargaining chip, Chloe was trapped. Her strength, her training, all of it was neutralized because of me. The thought was more painful than the pressure of the gun against my skull. Marcus began to pace the room, moving with a predator's restless energy. He ran a hand over the spines of the books on my shelf, picked up a framed photo of my late wife, and stared at it for a long moment before setting it down, his touch almost gentle. It was a terrifying performance. "You had a good life here, didn't you?" he said, his voice a low murmur. "A beautiful home, a successful career, a wonderful daughter. You got everything my father lost, everything you took from him." He stopped in front of me, his eyes burning with a righteous fire. "Do you have any idea what it was like for us? After he was sent away, my mother had to work 2 jobs, cleaning houses just like this one, just to keep food on the table. I was the jailbird's son at school. We lost our house, we lost our friends, we lost everything." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "My father wasn't a bad man, Arthur. He was a proud man who made a mistake trying to provide for his family. But you, with your spotless record and your high and mighty principles, you couldn't just let it go. You had to be a hero. You had to burn it all down to make yourself feel clean." Every word was a perfectly aimed blow, designed to inflict maximum pain. And it worked. The guilt I had buried for decades came rushing back, suffocating me. Had I been wrong? Was my black and white morality just a selfish crusade that had ruined another family? He saw the conflict in my eyes and savored it. He died 5 years ago, Marcus continued, straightening up. A broken man, working as a handyman for a slumlord. He used to tell me stories about you. The young, ambitious engineer who built a career on my father's ruin. He made me promise that one day I would make you understand what it feels like to have your world taken from you, to have your family's future extinguished before your very eyes. His gaze shifted to Chloe, who had remained silent and still throughout his entire monologue. And that's when I saw her, your daughter. An FBI star, so successful, so strong, the perfect symbol of everything my family could have been, the perfect thing to take away from you. The room fell silent. The weight of his confession, the sheer depth of his hatred, was suffocating. I looked at my living room, at the sunlight streaming through the windows, and my mind suddenly drifted. I wasn't there anymore. I was back in this same room 15 years earlier. Chloe was 13, hunched over the coffee table, tears of frustration in her eyes as she struggled with her algebra homework. The evening light was golden, just like it was now. I remember the smell of dinner cooking in the kitchen. I sat down next to her, not giving her the answers, but walking her through the problem, step by step. I remember the exact moment her face lit up with understanding. "Oh," she'd exclaimed, a brilliant smile chasing away the tears. "I get it now." She'd finished the rest of her homework with a fierce determination. I had felt such a surge of pride in that moment, not just for her intelligence, but for her resilience, for her refusal to quit. A tear traced a path down my cheek as the memory dissolved, leaving me back in the cold, terrifying present, back in the cage. Leo shifted his weight, pressing the gun harder against my head, as if to remind me where I was. I looked at Chloe, and I saw the same girl. The same fierce determination was there, but it wasn't directed at an algebra problem anymore. It was directed at Marcus, and then I felt it. A subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. It was a change in my daughter. Her posture softened slightly. The hard, analytical edge in her eyes seemed to dissolve, replaced by something that looked like fear. My heart sank. Had his threats finally broken through her training? Chloe allowed her shoulders to slump a fraction of an inch. She let her breathing become a little more shallow, a little more audible. It was a calculated performance. Marcus was a man driven by emotion, ego, revenge, a sense of injustice. Logic and procedure wouldn't work on him anymore. But emotion he would understand. He needed to feel he was in control, that he was winning, that he was breaking her. Her mind, however, was a cold, quiet processor scanning variables. The reflection in the TV screen showing Leo's grip, the frayed lamp cord near the water dispenser, the weight of the ceramic vase on the mantelpiece. She needed a 2-second window, and she knew how to create it. Chloe finally spoke, and her voice was different. It was hesitant, laced with a tremor that hadn't been there before. It was the voice of the scared girl I had imagined her to be. "Please," she began, looking at Marcus. "You've made your point. You win. Just tell us what you want." Marcus's lips curled into a satisfied smirk. "What I want Arthur to feel the same helplessness my father felt for the last 20 years of his life. Money can't buy that." "Maybe not," Chloe said, taking a small shuffling step forward. "But it can help you disappear. Start a new life. Isn't that what you really want? A clean slate?" She was bargaining. My heart ached for her. She was trying to find a way out, any way out. "What are you talking about?" Marcus asked, intrigued despite himself. "The money," Chloe said, her voice barely a whisper. "From my mother's life insurance, and some other investments. It's not here, not in the house, but it's accessible. It's in a safe." I stared at her, my mind reeling in confusion. What was she saying? My wife's insurance money had been put into a trust for Chloe years ago. It wasn't a stash of cash, and we certainly didn't have a safe. This was madness. Was she delirious with fear? Was she making up a story so wild that it might just buy us a few more minutes of life? Leo grunted. She's lying. Is she? Marcus said, his eyes now gleaming with a new kind of light. Greed. It was a powerful, predictable emotion. Where is this safe? It's at a private deposit facility downtown, Chloe explained, her story becoming more elaborate. It requires a key, which is here, and a biometric scan from me. I can take you there. You can have it all. Over $100,000. You could be on a beach in Mexico by tomorrow night. A tense silence filled the room. Marcus was considering it. His revenge was an ideology, but $100,000 was a tangible escape. I could see the conflict warring in his face. He looked at Leo, a silent conversation passing between them. Leo just shrugged, his eyes wide with the thought of that much money. The plan was insane. A lie built on top of a lie. It was a desperate, hopeless gambit. I wanted to scream at her to stop, to tell her it was no use, that this man only wanted to see us suffer. But then I saw her eyes again. Just for a second her gaze flickered toward me. The mask of fear was gone, and in its place I saw that same look from the algebra problem so many years ago. The look that said, I get it now. She wasn't bargaining. She wasn't delirious. She was solving the problem, and I was part of the equation. My confusion turned into a new kind of terror, the terror of the unknown. I had no idea what her next move was, only that it was coming. And I was standing right at the center of the board. What in God's name was she doing? Was she buying time? Or was she walking us both into a grave? My confusion turned into a new kind of terror, the terror of the unknown. I had no idea what her next move was, only that it was coming, and I was standing right at the center of the board. What in God's name was she doing? Was she buying time, or was she walking us both into a grave? Marcus, blinded by his newfound greed, took the bait. The allure of $100,000 and a clean getaway had momentarily eclipsed his quest for vengeance. "All right," he commanded, his voice sharp with authority. "No tricks. You walk. Slowly. Leo, you stay on the old man. If she so much as breathes wrong, you know what to do." Leo grunted in affirmation, his knuckles pressing the gun so hard into my temple that I saw spots dance in my vision. My entire world, my entire life, now depended on a lie about a non-existent safe. Chloe nodded, her face a mask of subservient fear. She turned and began to walk toward the staircase at the far end of the living room. Each footstep on the hardwood floor was a hammer blow against my heart. "Don't go up there, Chloe," I screamed in my mind. "There's nothing there for you. It's a dead end." Her steps were slow, deliberate, too slow. She wasn't just walking, she was measuring the distance, her body language deceptively meek. Marcus followed a few paces behind her, his own weapon now raised and ready. Leo, beside me, was distracted, his eyes glued on the unfolding drama, the thought of the money making him careless. The pressure of the gun against my head lessened by a fraction. They were halfway across the room. Chloe's hand was almost on the newel post of the staircase. This was it. The lie was about to unravel. My body tensed for the inevitable gunshot. And then she acted. It wasn't a move toward the stairs. It was a violent, explosive pivot that seemed to defy physics. In the space of a single heartbeat, her body didn't retreat. It coiled, a spring wound impossibly tight. In a blur of motion, her leg snapped out in a vicious, perfectly aimed side kick. But she wasn't aiming at Marcus. She wasn't aiming at a person at all. Her target was the tall, slender metal floor lamp standing next to the entertainment center. The sound was a deafening crack as her foot connected with the lamp's stem. The heavy fixture, thrown off balance, crashed sideways with incredible force directly into the large plastic water dispenser next to it. The dispenser exploded, sending a 5-gallon torrent of water cascading across the floor and directly into the power strip and electrical outlet it was plugged into. A brilliant blue-white flash lit up the room, followed instantaneously by a sound like a firecracker, a loud "Papa!" that made me flinch. The lights in the entire house went out, plunging us into absolute disorienting darkness. A scream of pure terror ripped through the black. It wasn't Chloe. It wasn't Marcus. It was Leo. The sudden chaos, the flash, the darkness. It had shattered his focus. In his panic, his grip on me faltered. The gun was no longer pressed against my head. I could feel his body trembling with fear beside me. This was it. This was the window, the 2-second window Chloe had created for me. Adrenaline, pure and hot and tasting of copper, flooded my system. I am 60 years old. My back aches in the morning and I take pills for my blood pressure. I am not a hero. I am not a fighter, but I am a father. And that was enough. I didn't think. I reacted. With a guttural roar that was torn from the deepest part of my soul, I threw my entire body weight sideways, directly into Leo. My shoulder slammed into his chest. He was bigger, stronger, but he was off balance and terrified. We went down together in a clumsy, tangled heap onto the floor. I felt a sharp pain in my side as we hit the edge of the coffee table, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was the beautiful, beautiful sound of his pistol clattering away across the hardwood floor, lost somewhere in the dark. For a moment I was disoriented, gasping for breath on the carpet. The fight was only half won. Where was Marcus? Where was Chloe? And then I heard it. From the other side of the room, in the pitch black, came the sounds of the other fight. It wasn't a clumsy struggle like mine had been. It was a sequence of sharp, efficient, brutal noises. There was a grunt of surprise from Marcus. Cut short, I heard the distinct thwack of a hand striking flesh, followed by the sound of something heavy, a vase maybe, being swept from a surface and shattering on the floor. I heard a choked gasp, a low thud, like a knee driving into a solar plexus. Then a sharp, wet crack that sounded sickeningly like a joint being twisted past its limit. It was over in less than 5 seconds. The final sound was the heavy, definitive fall of a body, not a clumsy tumble like ours, but a dead weight drop, a body that was no longer in control of its own descent. And then silence, a ringing, absolute silence, broken only by my own ragged, desperate gasps for air. The darkness was total, profound. The air was thick with the smell of ozone from the fried electrical socket. The emergency lights in the hallway, powered by a backup battery, suddenly flickered on. They cast a pale, ghostly glow into the living room, illuminating the scene like a tableau from a nightmare. Leo was groaning on the floor a few feet from me, trying to push himself up. And across the room I saw Marcus. He was face down, motionless. Standing over him, breathing steadily, almost calmly, was my daughter. Her hair was slightly mussed, her knuckles were red, but she was standing. She was in control. The cage was broken, the ghosts were banished, and in the wreckage of my living room, in the eerie glow of the emergency lights, I looked at my daughter and felt a wave of awe so powerful it washed away all the fear. I wasn't looking at my little girl anymore. I was looking at the woman she had become. I was looking at the woman she had become. In the eerie, flickering glow of the emergency lights, the world seemed to hold its breath. The only sounds were my own ragged gasps and the low, pathetic groans coming from Leo on the other side of the room. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and something else, something metallic and sharp. The scent of violence. My body ached. A fire was spreading through my shoulder where I'd hit the wall, and my side was a dull, throbbing drum of pain. But I couldn't move. I could only watch my daughter. Chloe didn't rush to me. Her training, that deep, ingrained discipline, had taken over completely. She moved with a fluid economy of motion that was mesmerizing to watch. First, she kicked the pistol that had clattered from Leo's hand farther away, sending it skittering into the darkness under the piano. Then she approached Marcus, who was still motionless, and used her foot to nudge him onto his side, checking to see if he was conscious. Seeing he was out cold, she retrieved the zip tie she must have dropped and with a quick, practiced motion, secured Leo's hands behind his back as he mumbled incoherently. Only when the immediate threats were fully neutralized did she finally turn to me. She crossed the wrecked living room, her steps sure and steady amidst the broken glass and spilled water. She knelt down beside me, her eyes, now clear of that battle-hardened focus, filled with a deep and familiar concern. It was the same look she'd given me years ago when I'd slipped on some ice while shoveling the driveway. "Dad," she said, her voice soft, all business gone. "Dad, are you okay? Talk to me." I tried to answer, but all that came out was a dry, choked sound. I simply reached out a trembling hand and laid it on her arm, just to feel that she was real, that she was safe, that we were safe. The strength I felt there, the solid, living muscle beneath her skin, was the most reassuring thing I had ever touched. That's when we heard it. Faint at first, then growing rapidly louder. The unmistakable rising and falling wail of sirens. They were close, very close. The sound was a wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy. I saw the familiar flashing red and blue lights painting streaks across the living room walls, dancing over the wreckage. Help was here. The real world was returning. The front door burst open, and 2 uniformed police officers entered, weapons drawn, shouting commands. "Police! Don't move! Show me your hands!" Chloe immediately stood up, raising her hands slowly into the air, palms open. "It's okay!" she called out, her voice calm and authoritative, cutting through their tension. "The suspects are down and unarmed. My father and I are the residents. We're the victims." The officers, both young men, took in the scene with wide, disbelieving eyes. The 2 subdued intruders, the wrecked room, me still on the floor, and this composed young woman standing in the middle of it all. More officers arrived, followed by paramedics. I saw my neighbor, Eleanor Vance, a tiny woman in her 70s, peeking through the doorway, her face pale with worry. "I heard the crash," she said to an officer, "and a man shouting. I called right away." God bless her. The next hour was a blur of methodical chaos. The paramedics checked me over, fussing about my shoulder and insisting I go to the hospital, a suggestion I politely but firmly refused. The police questioned us separately. My own statement was a jumbled, emotional mess, a frantic retelling of guns and threats and a father's ghost. But when I overheard Chloe giving her report to a grim-faced detective, it was a different story. Her account was clear, concise, and clinical. She laid out the timeline, the threats, the escalation, the impersonation, and the final confrontation with the detached precision of an officer dictating an official report. She never once mentioned her fear, only the facts. The detective listened, his expression shifting from professional skepticism to one of quiet, profound respect. He looked from her to the 2 pathetic, handcuffed men being led out of my house, and I saw him shake his head ever so slightly in disbelief. Eventually the sirens faded. The flashing lights were gone. The last of the officers left, promising a follow-up in the morning. Marcus and Leo, Frank Thorne's bitter legacy, had been swallowed up by the justice system. And then it was over. Chloe and I were left standing alone in the ruins of our living room. The silence they left behind was louder than any of the noise that had come before. It was a heavy, ringing silence, filled with everything that had just happened. The floor was slick with water. Shards of the shattered vase glittered like hostile diamonds on the rug. The overturned lamp lay like a fallen soldier. The house felt violated, wounded. Chloe walked over to the thermostat and clicked on the heat, chasing away the chill that had settled deep in my bones. "I should try the circuit breaker," she said, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet. "See if I can get the lights back on." "Let it wait till morning," I managed to say, my own voice hoarse. I finally pushed myself up from the floor and sank into my armchair, the one place in the room that seemed untouched. She didn't argue. She just came over and sat on the ottoman in front of me, tucking her legs underneath her like she used to do when she was a little girl. We sat there for a long time, not speaking, just listening to the house settle around us. You know, I said finally, breaking the silence, when you told them about the safe, for a second, I thought you'd lost your mind. A small smile touched her lips. It was the first one I'd seen all night. He was a man driven by a story, she said softly. His whole life was a narrative of revenge. The only way to beat him was to give him a better story, a story about greed. I shook my head in wonder. That look on your face, I said, right before it all happened. It reminded me of when you were 13, struggling with that algebra homework. Right here in this room, you got so frustrated you were almost in tears. And then suddenly, you got it. And that look of pure, focused determination came over you. The same look I saw tonight. She looked down at her hands, her red knuckles. Algebra is easier, she said quietly. You just have to solve for X. And what were you solving for tonight, honey? She looked up, and her eyes met mine. They were clear and deep and full of a strength that humbled me. I was solving for you, Dad, she said. That was it. That was all that needed to be said. The dam inside me broke, and I wept. I wept for the terror we had endured. I wept for the violation of our home. But mostly I wept with a sense of pride so immense, so overwhelming, it felt like my heart would burst. Later, as the first pale light of dawn began to creep through the windows, I sat alone in the quiet, looking at the damage. A house can be repaired, furniture can be replaced, but some things, once they happen, change the landscape of your life forever. I had always thought that being a good father meant protecting my daughter from the world. I had spent my life building a fortress of peace and quiet for her. Tonight, the world had breached that fortress. It had come inside with a gun and a ghost from the past, and I had been utterly helpless to stop it. But my fortress hadn't fallen, because I had it all backwards. The fortress was never the house. The fortress was her. There are two kinds of strength in this world. There is the loud, brittle strength of men like Marcus, built on anger and grievance. It makes a lot of noise, and it breaks in the dark. Then there is another kind of strength. It is quiet, patient, forged in discipline and honed by character. It is the strength I saw in my daughter tonight. I am not a fighter. I am not a hero. My contribution to the fight was a clumsy, desperate act of a terrified old man. But I am a father, and I raised her. I raised the woman who stood calm in the face of chaos, who outthought a man consumed by hatred, and who took back our home with her own 2 hands. And that is a strength that will never be broken.